Whiteside County, Illinois, June 12, 1871. Early morning before the heat. Amos Watkins had been the State Geologist of Illinois for 4 years. He was 43 years old, a methodical and deeply serious man who had spent his career in the kind of institutional science that required political survival as much as intellectual rigor, balancing the needs of agricultural surveys with the demands of mining interests, navigating the legislature's indifference to pure research, producing the reports that allowed the state to understand its own ground. He was not a romanticist. He had published 11 technical monographs on Illinois stratigraphy in the preceding decade and had built the Geological Survey from a single-man operation into a functioning institution. He believed in what could be measured and documented. He had come out to Whiteside County on a routine visit to the Illinois Central Railroad's grading operation. The new line was cutting through a section of ground whose geological composition he had not personally surveyed, and the exposed cuts were the best opportunity available for direct stratigraphic observation. He was not looking for anything unusual. He was 30 yards into the cut, reading the Pennsylvanian-era strata that the grading had exposed, when the railroad laborer working ahead of him held up something small and called him over. The laborer's name was Thomas Beatty. He was a general laborer on the grading crew and had been working this section for 3 days. He was at a depth of approximately 30 feet below the original surface when he found the first coin. Not in the disturbed fill that the grading operation had been moving, but in the native geological layer that the grading had just exposed, in a seam of compacted clay between 2 identifiable strata whose relative ages Watkins could read from the cut face. Watkins took the coin from Beatty and looked at it. He described it in his field notes as bronze, approximately the diameter of a United States half-dollar of the period, corroded in a manner consistent with very long burial in alkaline soil, bearing on one face an image he recognized immediately as a Roman portrait profile, a head with a laurel wreath, and on the other face a figure and lettering consistent with Latin inscription. He had studied classical antiquity at Ohio University before turning to geological science, and he knew what a Roman coin looked like. He was looking at one. He asked Beatty where in the cut face the coin had come from, and Beatty showed him. 30 feet below surface, in the undisturbed clay seam, at a location Watkins could assess stratigraphically. He spent the next 2 hours examining the seam and the material around it. He found 6 more coins in a 15-foot lateral section of the same stratum, not scattered at different depths, but together in the same geological layer, as though they had been at that location when the stratum was laid down. Not intrusive, not coins that had worked their way down through overlying material. They were in the stratum, surrounded by it, enclosed by it on all sides, as the layer material had been when it was deposited. He took all 7 coins. He noted the precise location, depth, and stratigraphy. He went back to Springfield. The stratum in which the coins appeared was a depositional layer that Watkins, in his supplementary report filed with the Illinois State Geological Survey in July 1871, identified as belonging to the Middle Holocene, a period whose absolute chronology places deposition at a minimum of 2,000 years before present, and more probably 3,000 to 5,000 years. The identification was based on standard stratigraphic methods: position relative to known marker horizons, comparison with documented sequences at other Illinois sites, and the physical characteristics of the layer itself: grain size, mineral composition, degree of compaction, consistent with a depositional age well in excess of 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago is approximately the 1st century BC. The Roman coins that Amos Watkins found in a geological layer deposited before that date were manufactured, on the basis of their iconographic characteristics, during the Roman imperial period. approximately the 1st to the 3rd century AD. This creates an apparent contradiction. Coins manufactured after the depositional date of the layer they were found in cannot logically be present in that layer through any natural process. The resolution that Watkins himself proposed, in the careful language of the supplementary report, was one of two possibilities. Either his stratigraphic dating was in error, and the coins arrived through normal European settlement at a depth that the standard geological record does not explain, because 30 feet of deposition in 200 years is not a process the Holocene geology of Whiteside County supports. Or the coins were at that location because people who carried them were at that location during a period of active Holocene sedimentation, and the sediment closed over them. He did not draw the conclusion that this second possibility implied. He was a state geologist, filing a report with a state institution in 1871. He documented the find, proposed the two interpretive options, stated that analysis of the coins was required before either option could be evaluated, submitted the report, and submitted the 7 coins with it. His dismissal notice from the position of State Geologist of Illinois is dated October 3, 1871, 3 months after the submission. The dismissal is recorded in the Illinois Secretary of State's administrative records without stated cause. Watkins had been in the position for 4 years and had received no documented criticism of his work. The Geological Survey's annual report for 1871, published after his termination, does not mention the Whiteside County find or the supplementary report. The supplementary report itself was retained in the survey's archive, where it remained in the miscellaneous record series until a researcher cataloging the collection in 1937 identified it and assigned it the archival designation it currently holds. The 7 coins did not follow the report into the archive. The survey's accession records for 1871, which list all physical specimens received from field operations that year, contain no entry for coins of any description from Whiteside County. The coins were submitted with the report. The report arrived. The coins did not, or if they arrived, were not accessioned. The distinction between non-arrival and non-accession is not determinable from the record. A letter dated August 22, 1871 from the Smithsonian Institution's Spencer Baird to the Illinois State Geological Survey Director requesting that any anomalous archaeological specimens encountered in the survey's operations be referred to Washington for assessment before publication is in the Federal Administrative Correspondence Files for 1871. The letter is dated 7 weeks after Watkins submitted his supplementary report. It does not mention Whiteside County or Roman coins specifically. The survey director's response is not in the file. The dismissal of Amos Watkins came 10 weeks after that letter. The letter requesting pre-publication referral of anomalous specimens was sent in August. The state geologist who had found and reported the anomalous specimens was removed from his position in October. The sequence is in the administrative record. The connection between the two events is in the sequence, not in any document that explicitly links them. The technical argument for the Whiteside County coin's significance does not depend on resolving the stratigraphic dating question. It depends on resolving a simpler question. How did they get there? There are 3 possibilities. First, the stratigraphic dating was wrong, and the coins arrived through normal European settlement or trade in the 17th or 18th century and were buried at a depth of 30 feet through some process the standard geological record does not explain. Because 30 feet of deposition in 200 years is not a process the Holocene geology of Whiteside County supports. Second, the coins were planted by someone who wished to deceive, a hypothesis that requires an explanation for why someone would plant 7 Roman coins 30 feet underground in a railroad cut in a county with no history of archaeological controversy. In 1871, in circumstances that a state geologist examining the surrounding stratigraphy would find consistent. Third, The coins were at that location because people who carried them were at that location during active Holocene sedimentation. The third option is inconsistent with the official historical framework for the Americas, which holds that no sustained contact between Old World and New World civilizations occurred before the Norse arrival in the late 10th century. The official framework is built on what has been found and documented, not on what has been found and removed. Amos Watkins left state employment in October 1871 and returned to private geological consulting. He continued to work in Illinois and Indiana through the 1880s, producing survey work for mining companies and agricultural operations. He published nothing on the Whiteside County find. His personal papers, correspondence, field notes from his tenure as state geologist, were donated to the Illinois State Historical Society by his family after his death in 1893. A review of the collection, conducted by the archivist Helen Cross in 1968, found that the correspondence file for 1871 contained a gap from July through October, the months between the supplementary report submission and the termination notice. Cross noted the gap in her finding aid without drawing conclusions. The letters from those months, if they existed, were not present when the collection was donated. The railroad cut in Whiteside County has long since been incorporated into the Illinois Central line. The specific location of the find, 30 yards into the cut at 30 feet depth in the clay seam between the identifiable marker horizons, is determinable in principle from Watkins's field notes, which describe the stratigraphy precisely enough to allow correlation with the current rail corridor. Whether the stratum is still accessible along the cut is a question the current right-of-way configuration does not answer simply. The land immediately adjacent to the railroad right-of-way along the relevant section includes one parcel whose ownership traces to a limited liability company incorporated in Delaware in 2004 with no commercial activity on record. The registered agent is a Wilmington law firm. The parcel taxes have been paid without interruption since 2004. A gate is visible from the county road. A camera is mounted on the gate post. The housing is newer than the gate. The 7 coins that Amos Watkins held in his hands on the morning of June 12, 1871, at 30 feet below the surface of Whiteside County, have not been in any documented location since the summer of 1871. His thumbnail sketch of the laurel-wreathed profile in his field notes, 11 lines of pencil in the hand of a precise man who trusted what he could measure, is the last image made of them by someone who held them in documented circumstances. The sketch is in the Illinois State Archives. The coins are not. The ground is still above the stratum that contained them. 30 feet of Holocene clay separates the coin layer from the surface of Whiteside County, and the stratum is still there, still at that depth, in the darkness below the railroad corridor, unchanged since Thomas Beatty's hand reached into the right layer at the right depth on the morning of June 12, 1871, and found the first one. The broader context of anomalous Old World material in pre-Columbian American geological strata is one the official historical framework has consistently declined to develop, not because the physical evidence is absent, but because the institutional costs of developing it are high. The Grave Creek Mound tablet, found in West Virginia in 1838, bore an inscription that multiple independent researchers identified as an Old World script, and which the federal scientific establishment officially classified as fraudulent, without conducting the chemical analysis that would establish or rule out fraud definitively. The Newark Decalogue stone, found in an Ohio burial mound in 1860, bore a Hebrew inscription authenticated by 3 independent scholars, and which was dismissed without chemical analysis as a 19th century forgery. The Bat Creek stone, found in a Tennessee mound in 1889 by a federal agent, was officially published as a Cherokee inscription for 80 years before a linguist identified it as Paleo-Hebrew in 1964. The Whiteside County coins occupy the same category, Physical objects found in pre-contact geological context by a credentialed professional, documented before institutional contact, and then either disappeared or subjected to official dismissal without the physical analysis that would allow independent evaluation. The common element across these cases is not the objects. It is the institutional response. The objects are diverse in material, script, and geographic origin. The institutional response is not diverse. It is consistent. Rapid dismissal, absence of physical analysis, removal of the documenting professional from institutional position, and physical disappearance of the objects into a custody whose records do not acknowledge receiving them. The response to the Whiteside County coins followed the pattern within 3 months of Watkins's supplementary report. The documenting professional was removed from his position. The supplementary report was filed in a miscellaneous series. The physical specimens were not accessioned, and an institutional letter arrived at the state survey 7 weeks after the find was reported, requesting pre-publication referral of anomalous specimens. The economic dimension of the Whiteside County case operates differently from mine closure suppression. There was no mine to seal and no land to acquire at the specific point of the find. A railroad cut in active use. The economic interest was the Illinois Central Railroads. The railroad had, in 1871, just completed the most extensive land grant in the history of American railroading. A federal grant of approximately 2.5 million acres of Illinois land as an incentive for construction. A finding of pre-Columbian archaeological significance along the right-of-way would have created a legal obligation to halt construction, conduct archaeological assessment, and potentially alter the route. Obligations whose cost in time and capital in the middle of the post-war construction boom would have been substantial. The railroad had no direct role in Watkins's dismissal, which was a state action. But the letter requesting pre-publication referral arrived 7 weeks after the find was reported, and the sequence of events in the administrative record is what it is. The land immediately adjacent to the railroad right-of-way along the relevant section in Whiteside County includes a parcel whose ownership traces to a limited liability company incorporated in Delaware in 2004, with no commercial activity on record. The registered agent is a Wilmington law firm. The parcel taxes have been paid without interruption since 2004. A gate is visible from the county road. A camera is mounted on the gatepost. The housing is newer than the gate. The supplementary report that Amos Watkins submitted in July 1871 is in the Illinois State Archives, in the Miscellaneous Records series, where it has been since that year. It describes 7 bronze coins with Roman iconographic characteristics and Latin inscription at 30 feet depth in undisturbed Middle Holocene geology in Whiteside County, Illinois. The coins, described in the report, have been in no documented location since the summer of 1871. The report waited 66 years before anyone cataloged it. It is still waiting, correctly cataloged since 1937, describing objects that no longer exist in any accessible inventory. Amos Watkins was 43 years old on the morning of June 12, 1871. When he stood in a railroad cut in Whiteside County and held a coin in his hand that his 20 years of stratigraphic experience told him was in a layer older than the Roman Empire. He turned it over in his fingers. He recognized the laurel wreath and the Latin inscription, and he understood what they meant. And he wrote down what he understood and submitted the coins with the writing attached. He was not looking for this. He had come to read the stratigraphy. The coin came out of the right layer at the right depth, and Thomas Beatty called his name across the cut, and he walked over and took it. The sketch he made of the profile is still in his field notes in Springfield. 11 pencil lines in the hand of a precise man who trusted what he could measure. The coin that sat for the sketch is not in any archive. The stratum it came from is still at 30 feet below the surface of Whiteside County, in the darkness below the railroad corridor and the adjacent parcel with the gate, undisturbed since the grading crew moved through in the summer of 1871 and left the clay seam sealed again behind them. The analysis Watkins called for in his final paragraph has never been conducted. The coins are gone. The ground that held them is not.